All right, welcome to the first part of our quarter 3 exam review. Here we're talking about parallel and perpendicular lines. So it's been a little while since we talked about these, but hopefully it all kind of comes back to you. So we'll keep it short. Rule for parallel lines. Parallel lines are, of course, lines that have the same exact slope. Okay, meaning if one slope is a over b, the other slope is a over b. Or, for example, with numbers, if one line slope is 2, the other line slope is 2. Or if it's 1/2, the other line slope is 1/2. The exact same slope. So for perpendicular lines, they have what's known as opposite reciprocal slopes. So what that means is that if you have a slope that's a over b, its opposite reciprocal, I guess not equals, but I'll leave it equals even though it's technically wrong, is negative b over a. So what happens is the slope reverses and it becomes the opposite sign. So for example, positive 1/2 would turn into negative 2 over 1, which is the same thing as 2. So we're going to fill this in right here, just kind of get an idea of what the parallel lines or slope or perpendicular lines would look like. So if we have a line with a slope of 1/2, a slope of a parallel line will have the exact same slope of 1/2. But its opposite reciprocal slope for perpendicular line, the perpendicular line has the opposite reciprocal slope, will flip the fraction upside down. So it'd be 2 over 1 and would change the sign from a positive to a negative. So its slope is negative 2 over 1 or just simply negative 2. So 5, if you have a parallel line to 5, its slope is also going to be 5. Perpendicular line will have the opposite reciprocal slope. So remember, 5 currently is like 5 over 1. So if you flip it around, then it becomes 1 over 5, and it changes to a negative as well. So its opposite reciprocal slope would be negative 1/5. Parallel for negative 3 would be, again, negative 3, same exact slope. So those are pretty standard. But remember, think of it like this. For the opposite reciprocal, for the perpendicular, you have to flip these around. So it's going to be 1 over 3. And since it was negative, now we're going to leave it positive since the sign has to change. So it would be a positive 1/3. Parallel to 4/7 would be 4/7. Perpendicular to 4/7 would be negative 7 over 4. Again, opposite sign and flips the fraction. Negative 2/3 parallel would be negative 2/3. Again, same exact slope. Perpendicular, though, would become positive and then 3 over 2. For negative 1/8, the parallel would be negative 1/8 again, because remember it's the same exact slope. But for perpendicular, it'd be a positive 8 over 1, which 8 over 1 is the same as just regular 8. And then last but not least, parallel to 1/6 would be 1/6, but the perpendicular one would be negative and reverse it, so negative 6 over 1, which would be negative 6. So now let's get to the equation parts of it. Find the equation of a line that's parallel to y equals 3x plus 5 and goes to the point 2, 4. So we're writing a new equation of a line that's parallel to this one. Now, what we first need to identify is what the slope of our line is going to be. Now, the slope of the current line is 3, and parallel means same slope. So our new line is going to also have a slope of 3. And it needs to go through the point 2, 4. Now, one thing to remember is that the b value in the original equation, the plus 5, is completely useless. It means nothing. It's used for nothing. It's just the original b value, but it has no part to play in the rest of this problem. But our equation, our answer, is going to be y equals 3x plus b. Now, our answer is not complete yet because we don't know what the b value is. But we do know that, remember, because our line is parallel to this one, that our slope was 3, so I went ahead and put the 3 there for the slope. So we already know the slope is there. It's just, what's the b value? You know, it could be plus 7, it could be plus 8, it could be minus 1, it could be anything, right? So that's where the point comes in. And this is what we're going to use. We're going to use the x from the 2 value and the 4 as the y value. And we're going to use that to find our b value. So we're going to start from scratch, y equals mx plus b, and plug in the 3 numbers that we know. We know the y value here is 4, so I'm going to plug this in and use it. I'm going to use the m value, which is the slope, so that's 3. And the x value I'm going to use is 2. plugging all those in, but the only thing I can't plug in is b because I don't know b, but I do know my slope, I do know x, and I do know y because the slope's the same as this line, and the x and the y come from this point here. So I plug it in, and all I gotta do is solve. So 3 times 2 is going to be 6, so this will be 4 equals to 6 plus b, and then we just, to solve for b, we have to just subtract the 6. Cancels out, and this becomes a negative 2 equal to b. So the b value that's in my answer is negative 2, meaning that my final answer is just y equals 3x minus 2. I just put that minus 2 in as the b value, and I've got my final equation. So number 2 is the same thing. Okay, so parallel to 1/2 means that our slope is also going to be 1/2, and it's got to go through the point 4, 5, as mentioned there. So remember, I already know my answer is going to be y equals 1/2 x plus b, but again, I don't know what b is, right? I know my slope is 1/2 though, simply because it's parallel to this line, which has a slope of 1/2. So remember, we'll start from scratch, y equals mx plus b, and plug in what we know. We know the y value is going to be 5. The m value is the 1/2, the slope, and the x value is the 4. So we plug those things in, and then we just solve. So 1/2 times 4 is 2. So that's going to be 5 equals 2 plus b. And then to get b by itself, I just subtract this 2. So that's going to give me 3 equal to b. So if b is equal to 3, then I'm going to plug it in and have my final answer. All right, so number 3. So let's identify slope again. So we're doing, again, parallel to this line. So this line has a slope of negative 1. Because it's negative x, that slope is technically a negative 1. So the slope of ours line is going to be negative 1, and it's got to go through the point negative 3, 1, as described here. So remember, I already know my answer is going to be y equals negative 1x or negative x, right? Simply plus b, but the question is, what's the b value again? So start from scratch. And plug in what we know. So the y value is going to be the 1. The m value is the negative 1. The x value is going to be negative 3. And then plus b. So keep in mind, your slope's negative 1, and the x value is negative 3, so you're multiplying a negative times a negative. So what we're going to have is y equal to a positive 3 plus b. So then we'll subtract 3 to solve, and we'll have b is equal to negative 2. So my answer is negative x minus 2. Y equals negative x minus 2. All right, number 4. So last parallel line one. So again, parallel lines are easy because the slope is just copy and paste. So parallel to this line is going to have a slope of 2/3. The point that we need to go through is 3, negative 2. And so remember, I already know my answer, y equals 2/3 x plus b. Like I said, I know the slope's 2/3. I just have to figure out what the b value is. So remember, same as before, plug in all these numbers. So y equals mx plus b. Y is going to be the negative 2. M is the 2/3. X is the 3. And b is, we don't know. Plug it in, right? We're going to solve for it. So this becomes negative 2 equal to 2/3 times 3 is just going to be 2. So when you subtract 2 from both sides, you end up with b equal to negative 4, because negative 2 minus 2 mean b is equal to negative 4. So my final answer would be 2/3 x minus 4. Okay, now we move on to the perpendicular lines. So it's pretty much the same, but with one slight exception, right? You have to know what the slope of your perpendicular line is going to be. So perpendicular to this line has a slope of 3, but perpendicular, remember, means opposite reciprocal slope. So if that line has a slope of 3, perpendicular to a slope of 3 would be negative 1/3. And that goes back to these changes. Remember how we had to take it, flip the fraction over and change the sign, right? Well, that's where it comes into play. Perpendicular line, opposite reciprocal slope. So the opposite of 3 over 1 is simply negative 1 over 3, right? So negative 1/3 is going to be our slope. And it has to go through the point 3, 6. So I already know my answer is going to be y equals negative 1/3 x plus b. Remember, I know my slope's negative 1/3 because of the opposite reciprocal to 3. But the question is, what is b? So we'll start from scratch and we'll figure that out. So the y is going to be 6, the m is going to be negative 1/3, the x is going to be 3, and then find b. So negative 1/3 times 3 is going to be negative 1. So we have 6 equals negative 1 plus b. So we'll add the 1 to both sides, and we'll have b is equal to 7. So plug it in, and we have our final answer. So let's move on to number 6, perpendicular again. So slope, let's identify that first. Remember, perpendicular to a line with a slope of 1/2 means the opposite reciprocal slope to 1/2 would be a negative 2/1, or simply just negative 2. So our slope is going to be negative 2, and it has to go through the point 3, 7. So remember, I already know my answer, y equals negative 2x plus b. I know my slope's negative 2, just have to find b. So y equals mx plus b. Let's plug everything in. So 7 for the y, negative 2 for my slope, 3 for the x, and then the b value you need to find. So this will be 7 equals negative 6 plus b. So add the 6, and we end up with 13. B is equal to 13, which makes this 2x plus 13. For number 7, again, perpendicular, its slope is going to be perpendicular negative 1 would be a positive 1, because if you have negative 1 as your slope, it's the same as negative 1/1. And when you reverse it, it's still going to be a 1/1, but the negative becomes a positive. So our slope is simply just a regular positive 1. That's perpendicular. It's the opposite reciprocal of negative 1. And we have to go through the point 4, negative 1. So I know my equation is going to be y equals 1x, or simply just x. You can put 1x if you want, but just x is the same. So then plus b, so we have to figure out what b is. So y equals mx plus b. So the y is going to be negative 1. The m is going to be that 1 right there. And the x is going to be 4. And so we solve it. So we have negative 1 equals 4 plus b, so subtract 4. And we end up with b equal to negative 5. So y equals x minus 5, or y equals 1x minus 5. Same thing as your final answer. And then one more, we have perpendicular to 2/3. So opposite reciprocal of that is going to be a negative 3/2. Has to go through the point 2, negative 3. So remember my answer, y equals negative 3/2x plus b. Remember, I already know the slope. Just got to find out what b is. So let's plug everything in. So for the y, I'll plug in negative 3. For the m, I'll plug in the negative 3/2, which is my slope, and then x, which is 2, plus b. So what we end up with is negative 3 equal to negative 3 plus b. When you add the 3 to both sides, you end up with 0 equal to b. So b is 0, so you can either write plus 0, or you can just leave it empty and just have y equals negative 3/2x as your answer. So that's going to cover the first part of the review. I'll see you guys in part 2.